Hi folks, it's Stuart from the Courtyard Cafe. Welcome back to my kitchen. All cafes make scones, and the scones that I make every morning in the courtyard are a recipe that I've been making for 20 years now. I used to have a cafe in Lurgan called Buttered Up, and this was my scone recipe. I hate the idea of anyone being put off making recipes by thinking that you need expensive kitchen equipment. The only tools that I'm going to use today to make the scones are a spatula, wooden spoon, cutter and a scraper. I've got 500 grams of self-raising soda bread flour, 125 grams of caster sugar, 125 grams of block margarine, that's a baking margarine you can get from any of the supermarkets, buttermilk and a couple of beaten eggs. What I'm going to do today, filling wise, is make some raspberry and white chocolate scones, which are always popular, and also a few cherry scones too. I'm going to put the flour, the sugar and the margarine into a mixing bowl. What I'm doing here is breaking up the pieces of margarine which I'd already cut up and rubbing them in with the flour and the sugar. It only takes a few minutes, and we'll get to a stage which is called breadcrumbs, and it's basically what it'll look like. You will know when the margarine's pretty much rubbed in, because it will get to the stage, as it is more or less now, where you're not feeling any pieces of margarine as you work the scone mix through your hands. I'll get in now with the other ingredients. That's 2 eggs, which I just very lightly beaten. I'll give that a mix just to get it started. And then for me, a particularly important ingredient, buttermilk. Exactly how much buttermilk probably changes from day to day, and a lot has to do with the size of the eggs, because they obviously are part of the overall liquid content of the scone dough. It doesn't take a massive amount of buttermilk, which is why I'm adding a little bit at a time. You can see it's already starting to form a dough. If the dough is too dry, the scones themselves will be dry from the start. And on the other hand, if the mixture is too wet, what you'll find is that as the scones go into the oven and the heat hits them, they'll actually start to collapse and they'll not rise. I didn't give a measurement for the buttermilk. This is the carton that I've just opened, and basically it has taken about half the carton. It's a 1 pint carton, 568 millilitres, so that's probably about 280 millilitres of buttermilk. We'll put some flour on the bench just to stop the dough from sticking, and empty it out. A little bit of flour on top. I make one batch of dough, and out of that I subdivide it and then put the different flavourings or fillings in. Raspberry and white chocolate are probably the most popular, so what I'll do is divide the dough into 2/3 and 1/3 very roughly. Make these raspberry and white, and make these ones some cherry scones. Flatten out the dough, tip some cherries out, chop them up a little bit. I think there's nothing worse than somebody getting a cherry scone that's 2/3 plain scone and a wee bit of cherry now and then. And all I do basically is fold that in and knead it very gently, just to mix the cherries in through that portion of the dough. As far as rolling them out, the cutter I'm going to use I also use as a guide for roughly the height that I want the scone dough to be. And simply press it down in. Same height again. And down in. What you can do if they stick is give your cutter a bit of a shake, and what you'll actually do is dust the inside of it, and it will help the scone sticking just so much. So work it up again, and that did fall out much more easily. Just a slightest dusting of flour on the tray, and pop the scones on. Cherry done. We'll move on now to the raspberry and white chocolate. For the raspberry and white chocolate, basically the same thing again. I've got white chocolate. Just got a bar of white chocolate in the supermarket. Cut it up. Spread that across the dough. Here we've got some frozen raspberries. They're cheaper and fresh, and I always have them in the freezer. I like to break those up a little bit because it helps them just spread through the scone mix. You do get a nice rippling effect. There's no issue I find with putting frozen raspberries in because they will thaw and then melt in the cooking of the scones. Fold it up as before. Tuck in anybody who escapes. And then we will soon be ready to start cutting them out. Scones do actually bake a lot better if you use a cutter because there is something about compressing the edges. That's the batch of scones made and ready to go into the oven. I'm going to put those into a preheated oven at 180 degrees and give them 20 minutes, after which I'll have a check and see if they need anything more. And that's them out of the oven. The finishing touch for the raspberry and white, just a little bit of melted white chocolate. When you're melting chocolate, I've used a microwave. Be careful because it is quite severe and chocolate burns very, very quickly, and white chocolate particularly. What I do is probably about every 15 seconds stop it and give it a stir. And there you go, folks. Cherry scones, raspberry and white chocolate scones. A lot cheaper than you'll get them in the bakery and way, way, way tastier.